In my eyes and many other people's eyes, there are two different primary use cases for cryptocurrencies going forward into the future. The first of those lies within transactions, and it's the one that is commonly associated with cryptocurrencies, and the reasons why the likes of Bitcoin and say Ethereum cannot succeed into the future, because the cost of doing or completing one of those transactions on the networks is prohibitively expensive. That is most certainly the case in terms of Bitcoin, because we are looking at a proof of work cryptocurrency blockchain, and Ethereum obviously historically was proof of work that has recently migrated across to proof of stake. Okay, so that's sort of example one or use case one for cryptocurrencies, facilitating cross-border payment transfers, nice and simple. The second one that is becoming more and more of a main narrative when we talk about cryptocurrencies and their future use cases is tokenization of real-world assets. And that could be done via things such as NFTs, where we effectively wrap ownership of a real-world asset, could be a gold bar, could be a car, could be a house, as something like an NFT or a transferable document that resides within someone's wallet to denote they have ownership over a particular asset. And of course, we've looked at this previously in videos with the likes of governing council partners for Hedera, in this case of Aberdeen, $600 billion fund manager in the United Kingdom, of course, looking at tokenizing real world assets. And there are multiple different layers of benefits when it comes to doing things like that. Most notably, the ease of doing business and transferring of those assets, the speed, the lack of friction, etc. Now on screen, I'm looking at the Ethereum average gas price, and this is based off me recently actually moving some old funds I had on a MetaMask wallet across, and still being shocked at how expensive the gas fees were on Ethereum. And one of the reasons why I truly love Hedera itself is completely first class. And I wanted to run through some very simple and crude calculations of what on earth I'm talking about. Looking at this on Y charts though, we can see even after Ethereum migrated from proof of work across to proof of stake, the average Ethereum gas price denoted in 𝗟𝗚, which is a fraction of an Ethereum token, is still significantly higher than the majority of other chains, especially DLT networks like Hedera. As we can see at the moment, the average gas price is roughly 77 𝗟𝗚. And if we go back into the past, much higher at nearly 500 𝗟𝗚 there, 200 𝗟𝗚, etc, etc. It has been decreasing over time. As I said, the transition from proof of work to proof of stake did improve this, but not as drastically as many people initially thought. Right then, let's look at those two different examples that I mentioned previously in terms of use cases. One being transferring of funds. So really simply transferring from wallet A to say wallet B in terms of a set amount of tokens. This could be the same as either doing a cross-border payment transfer, paying for something in a supermarket, or just buying something in general. And then of course we'll look at tokenizing real world assets, which effectively boils down to storing data on these chains to then be recalled or transferred later in the future. Like I said, this was going to be pretty crude. I'm in a Excel spreadsheet here and I've just whipped up some different numbers that we can quickly run through. On the left in columns B and C, let's go through the example of payment transfers. So for an Ethereum ERC20 transfer, which is all the tokens that are native to the Ethereum blockchain, the average cost at the moment when you factor the 𝗟𝗚 as a fraction of an Ethereum token is roughly $5.84 to transfer any amount of ERC20 tokens on the chain. Of course, this actually varies drastically. If I pull up the ETH price sort of calculator, I'll show you what I mean. So here is the Ethereum gas tracker, and we can see at the moment every sort of 15 seconds or so it's updating the price. On the low end is 78 𝗟𝗚, average 79 𝗟𝗚, and on the high end 84 𝗟𝗚, and these transfer into dollar amounts. However, that is just a base effectively. There are other estimated costs of transaction actions depending on the action you are undertaking on the blockchain itself. So we can see here, if I want to do something like, scroll up here, where is it? If I want to say add liquidity on Uniswap V3, on average, it's going to cost me nearly $20 just to add liquidity. And again, this is completely independent of the value that you are submitting. So if you want to add $1 of liquidity, it's going to cost you nearly $20 to do that, leaving you at a net negative in terms of that. If we look at the ERC20 transfer that I was talking about, there is the average figure that I pulled, and that is just sending between two different wallets. If I want to swap tokens, say on Uniswap V2, that's going to cost me nearly $14 on average. And you've got low and high either side of that, where I could pay different amounts to prioritize my trade or transfer. Some key takeaways quickly for those of you who aren't familiar with what transaction fees and gas is on Ethereum. On the Ethereum blockchain, gas refers to the cost necessary to perform a transaction on the network. Fairly simple. Although gas prices are based on the supply and demand for the network's validation requests. Transaction prices are then based on the gas limit and the gas price, with transaction prices being denoted in tiny fractions of Ether called 𝗟𝗚 or in Ethereum. So effectively we can tip the chain, etc., and sort of play around with our gas fees to prioritize the transaction taking place faster than someone else's transaction. Something like that is not possible on Hedera at all. No front running, etc., etc. And of course the fixed fees, which we'll be outlining in a second of how powerful those fixed fees on Hedera really are. Back over to my spreadsheet then. As I said, there is that ERC20 transfer average fee at the moment that you'd look to pay if I just transferred from wallet A to wallet B. Now for a comparable as well, I wanted to include Visa in here. Now Visa has some different costs depending on transaction sizes. I've just taken the average for those. So on average, a Visa transaction costs roughly 1.92% of the transaction that you're sending. So much better still than ETH because it's not an absolute figure. But of course, when we're dealing with absolute and variable figures, there is a trade-off between them, and then there's a break-even point to where one becomes better than the other, just due to the nature of something being fixed versus variable. In this instance, if I look to send $5 on Ethereum, that ERC20 transfer gas fee would cost me $5.84. Therefore, my gas fee is 117% of the total value that I am sending, i.e. I'm minus effectively 17% over what I had sent. At the $10 level, the gas fee then becomes 58% of my transaction, and so on and so forth. In fact, if I go all the way down to say $200, the transaction fee on Ethereum then becomes 3%, which of course is more stomachable and very similar or getting closer to a Visa. Simple bit of maths, if you just divide through the ERC20 fee, obviously by the average Visa fee, we can see that Visa becomes more expensive if we are transferring more than say $305, in which case the absolute fee on Ethereum of $5.84 becomes beneficial. I.e., what do I mean? If I'm sending $1 million, Ethereum is actually cheaper than say something like Visa. Now, of course, as we saw, those gas prices though are continually fluctuating. And if you go back into the past, that may not always remain constant. So this is something that has to be checked all of the time if you are sending things across on Ethereum, because the gas fee is continually fluctuating, other than say something fixed like Visa saying you pay us 2% and we'll move this money for you. So we can see here there are benefits to using different solutions. Right then, so that's use case one, and where we see realistically it's almost not feasible because of how widely variable the gas fee could be. Let's take Hedera in this example. Hedera's got a low fixed fee denominated in US dollars of 0.0001 per transaction. So if I'm going to be sending a variable amount of money, actually let me quickly run the numbers for that and I'll show you what that looks like. So for the same figures of $5 all the way up to say $200, that fixed fee of 0.0001 US dollars per transaction on average, there are some different fees associated with different transactions, you are looking at a fee of say sending $5 of 0.002%. And then of course, the larger the value becomes that I send on Hedera, and because that fee is completely fixed, it's not changing, I don't have to worry about it, it's always consistent, it just becomes an infinitely smaller percentage of that value. Therefore, meaning if I send $1 million or $1 billion, it's practically free in terms of a percentage variable of the amount that I've sent compared to something like Visa or even Ethereum in these instances. So if we're looking at use case one of transferring values effectively, Hedera obviously wins hands down because of that fixed fee structure. The second one then I was looking at, or I mentioned, was tokenization of real world assets. Now, to tokenize an asset on something like a blockchain or even a DLT, of course, involves some kind of data storage. All NFTs are effectively made up of bits and pieces of information that are then stored on the chains to be retrieved and sent between different wallets. So let's look at the initial case that someone would maybe come up with, which is we just store the data directly on the chains themselves. So for Ethereum, according to the yellow paper that was originally released, the fee is around 20,000 gas or 𝗟𝗚 to store a 256-bit word. A 256-bit word, as I've got later down here, is roughly the equivalent of a SHA-256 hash. A kilobyte thus is therefore 640,000 gas. There are 32 256 bits in a kilobyte, which is of course around 1024 bytes of information. So gas right now being around 56 𝗟𝗚, which is 0. load of zeros, I think it's 8 zeros, 6 Ethereum. That would then make a kilobyte of storage to cost 0.0384 Ethereum. If I want to store 1 kilobyte of data, 1 kilobyte of data on Ethereum, that's how much it would cost me. So 56 𝗟𝗚, that's it in ETH. That's my total gas cost. My total Ethereum amount becomes 0.0384. The current price of Ethereum, as of me shooting this video, is roughly $1,830. You multiply those out, and for me to store 1 kilobyte of information on Ethereum would cost me nearly $70. $70 to store a kilobyte of information. On the flip side, if we look at, say, something like Hedera, of course, the Hedera Consensus Service API enables you to create scalable and publicly verifiable timestamps, as well as fair ordering of events for any application or permission blockchain framework. Let's look at, say, sending a message to a particular topic in this instance. So we're talking about a kilobyte of data in terms of a string or a phrase or coordinates, which obviously would resonate with something like @.io. We can even see messages are 1024 bytes or a kilobyte, as we just did with the Ethereum example, of immutable data written to the ledger and made publicly verifiable. Assumption is 1 signature 1000 bytes per message size. And we can see that estimated fee being $0.0001 fixed. That would mean the difference between storing 1 kilobyte of information on Ethereum versus Hedera being 702,000 times more costly to do that same process, that same action on Ethereum as compared to Hedera. And this is when we start then bringing into things like how efficient and scalable Hedera, of course, is. And when you make comparisons like this is the rank 2 cryptocurrency currently in terms of market cap and even utilization in the retail space, yet it's 702,000 times more costly to store information. Think about which one of these big businesses are going to be choosing in order to run their applications. Think about large worldwide reaching use cases that need scalability, flexibility, predictable fees in order to run a business model. Things like Ethereum stop making sense really quickly when you start to scale these kind of things. Okay, then I may have cheated a little bit because Hedera predominantly uses like Filecoin and IPFS. For some of you that might not make much sense, but it's the interplanetary file explorer file system. And it's basically a different way where we store that information off chain and then basically call it through a Solidity contract. So we can store the data on IPFS. We can get the hash identifier of that file we particularly stored. We can then store that hash or identifier inside a smart contract. This will cost us some gas on Ethereum. We can then get the data from the smart contract. This won't cost any gas on Ethereum. And then we can use this hash in a call to the IPFS API to get the data file. So we basically store all the information off chain and then call it through the chain. And we get basically the same sort of functionality. And this is this is how things basically work nowadays on a lot of these blockchains. This was just me poking fun effectively if you were trying to do it the logical way of just storing the information directly on the chain, how it's not possible. Still, IPFS uses a SHA-256 open hash and then produces a 256-bit or 32-byte output, and that output is encoded with base 58 open external links. Or base 58. Obviously, I've got some weird copying stuff, or I've copied stuff. Obviously, SHA-256 hashes per kilobyte, that'd be roughly 32, as I mentioned previously. 32 times by the 256 bits equals our 1 kilobit that we looked at previously. And because there are 32 hashes in a single kilobit, we know we can just divide that earlier gas fee we saw on Ethereum of $70 by the 32, and that would roughly give us the cost for a single hash on Ethereum, which would be roughly $2.19. So even standardizing with IPFS on Ethereum is still 22,000 times more costly than the likes of Hedera. So back to what I said previously, will Ethereum continue to strive forward with the two different use cases that we see for cryptocurrencies? I don't think so. I think chains or DLTs like Hedera Hashgraph clearly have utility that far surpasses the technologies of the likes of Ethereum, and potentially that will be reflected in the market caps going forward, and probably the reason why Ethereum will not maintain that number 2 spot going into the future when we've got much more efficient cryptocurrency technology, DLT networks like Hedera Hashgraph that are up and coming, and we're already seeing this with the enterprise use cases over on Hedera itself, things like Atma.io via Avery Dennison, the coupon bureau that's looking to launch, and much wider reaching use cases where you can take advantage of these fixed fees. And these examples hopefully outline the sheer scale of the benefits to not only retail in terms of transferring money of that use case 1 we saw, but also use case 2 of, say, storing real world assets, tokenization of assets. It's still cheaper and more efficient to do things like that on Hedera than a antiquated solution, let's say, such as Ethereum. Let's not forget the size of Ethereum as well. Its current market cap of $220 billion. And let's just take a thought experiment that Hedera captures that market cap because the use cases flow across from Ethereum to Hedera. The current price of HBAR being 0.058 cents. The potential price, if it achieved that $220 billion market cap at the current circulating supply of HBAR, would be roughly $7 per token, or a potential upside of over 120 times from the current price. Hopefully that gives you some perspective as to why I have large convictions for Hedera going forward into the future, particularly if the HBAR Foundation and the Hedera team themselves keep rolling out the updates and the commitment to development on Hedera, the 100-year vision that they see as a reality going forward into the future. Hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. If you did, leave a like, drop a comment if you've got something to say. Until then, I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.